we want to kick off. This is in regard to addressing violent crime primarily in the city, but it also addresses property crimes. We know that we get the question all the time when our crime stats go up or we have some sort of event that happens. Everybody wants to know, what are you doing about the crime? We have some very good officers that work with us, and boots on the ground is very, very important, but there's a lot of technology that's available to us that we haven't had the opportunity to invest in yet. I tasked Lieutenant Hagan, who's with our Criminal Investigations Division, to put together some information in regard to developing a real-time crime center. And a real-time crime center basically is going to integrate several different new technologies for the police department to be able to use more data in regard to our crime-fighting efforts so that we can make sure that we're putting our boots on the ground in the right places, in addition to giving them some extra resources to fight crime before and after it happens. Some of the specifics to the program are going to be discussed by Lieutenant Hagan, and then subsequent to his presentation, which is actually on the overview of the crime center, we have Phil Daly from ShotSpotter, which is an integral part of what we're trying to propose. Has to do with gunfire detection in certain parts of the city when we put this program together, which is going to help us to combat crime. It's going to help us to collect evidence on crimes, and it's going to help make sure that we're going to the right locations when a crime is committed. With that being said, Lieutenant Hagan, come on up. There's some things that we're not capturing data-wise. This information that will be available to us through some of these programs is going to help us to capture better data. The initial expectation would be that we might see a couple of the stats go up because it's things that we're not capturing right now. But that'll give us the ability to address it in a broader scale over the next couple of years. So, like I said, the first year is going to be the implementation phase, and then year 2 and year 3 is where we should really see some progress with it. Lieutenant Hagan.
Thank you.
Welcome, Lieutenant.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Mayor, Commissioners, guests. I'm Lieutenant Clifford Hagan with the West Palm Beach Police Department Criminal Investigations Division. This morning, I'm presenting the Police Department's Real-Time Crime Center project for your review and consideration. Law enforcement agencies capture massive amounts of data and information coming in from 911 calls, police reports, accident reports, video surveillance, and emails, as well as information distributed from fusion centers throughout the state, other law enforcement agencies, and citizen contacts. This slide represents the 911 calls and the police response calls managed by our dispatch center in 2017. The mission of the Real-Time Crime Center is to develop new strategies to interdict criminal behavior through our community with the application of technology and human intelligence, provide real-time information to officers responding to priority calls for service, and to reduce gun violence and property crime through the development of real-time actionable intelligence. This morning I will introduce several technologies and explain how these systems, working in conjunction, can produce actionable intelligence and improve crime solution. Consider for a moment that you're an officer responding to a call of a crime, and the only information you have is that the suspect fled in a red car. As I present, I invite you to consider how these technologies can help you solve a crime. There are 4 cornerstones to real-time crime centers. The first is ShotSpotter, which Mr. Daly will introduce following my presentation. The second is license plate reader technology. The third, analytic capability. And the fourth, a capability to display this information geographically. We are proposing the installation of license plate readers throughout the city. Neighboring jurisdictions are already using this technology to protect its citizens, seaports, international airports, and other critical infrastructure. License plate readers work by using fixed cameras to read vehicle license plates, compare it to a known hot list, alerting on stolen vehicles, drivers with suspended driver's licenses, or vehicles being sought by law enforcement agencies. Best practices suggest that these readers should be installed on gateway roads. Based on experience, our homicide investigators will tell you that over 85% of our homicide cases involve a motor vehicle as a means of escape. Rapid identification and location of these vehicles can help identify offenders and lead to arrests. While evaluating the versatility of this technology, the demonstrations generated leads on vehicles used in homicides and violent crimes, led to the recovery of 4 stolen vehicles from our city, 1 being recovered out of the county, and a second being recovered out of state. Working with the municipal partners, we'll create a real-time license plate reader network that covers an area in which 70% of our murders and 70% of our shots fired calls have occurred over the past 3 years. We'll be able to share data in real time with one another and help to identify more quickly and apprehend suspects in burglaries, auto burglaries, violent crimes, and reducing criminal victimization. Over the past few weeks, we've been testing possible locations for permanent LPR installations. The test data was revealing as to the number of cars passing through the city with a nexus to law enforcement. I'd call your attention to the slide here. Congress Avenue, we had this up for 48 hours. 9 stolen vehicles and 6 wanted persons went through the reader during that time. Okay. On Australian Avenue, 2 stolen vehicles traveled through the reader in 2 days. And then on 45th Street, 14 stolen license plates traveled through the area we were monitoring. When officers conducting an investigation, after interviewing known victims and witnesses, one of the critical tasks he or she completes is a neighborhood canvass looking for additional witnesses and privately owned video systems that may have recorded a suspect or vehicle. This can be a time-consuming process, and video systems may be missed. Operation SafeCam is a proven model for community partnership that's being used across the country. Residents are going to be offered the opportunity to register their privately owned video systems with the police department through the department's website. This information will be available to officers in the field via the NC4 Street Smart system. Investigators will be able to use this list of privately registered video systems to identify locations with video and email the registered owner asking them to review their cameras. If something of evidentiary value were to be discovered, the owner would be asked to contact the investigator, who can arrange to obtain a copy of the video. Registration is simple, takes only about 10 minutes to complete. Basic information is collected regarding the property. There's no cost associated with this program, and the participant information is confidential. Users are going to be able to delete their data or their registrations at any time. The existing city camera network will be incorporated into the Real-Time Crime Center and work in conjunction with ShotSpotter and the LPR networks. The city cameras will monitor roadways to record access points near ShotSpotter activations. The third cornerstone of a real-time crime center is the ability to analyze data and create actionable intelligence. Quite often, video recordings are the only lead investigators have to locate potential suspects and witnesses. More and more often, law enforcement agencies are turning to video footage as the first line of investigation. Officers are trained to look for camera systems on every crime scene and help support investigations and provide valuable leads. On major scenes, the neighborhood canvas may result in hundreds of hours of video that must be reviewed by a detective to develop a valid lead. Video analytics software allows hundreds of hours of video to be summarized into minutes and easily reviewed by the investigator. The technology will help break the investigators from reviewing videos and getting back into the field investigating crimes. The system works by ingesting video from various sources, categorizing it into computer searchable objects, which can then be reviewed by detectives. The ability to start searching without exactly knowing what you're looking for is a breakthrough paradigm for post-event investigations. With video summaries, investigators can now afford to review video even if the chances of locating the subject being present are small. This was the technology used in Boston to identify the Boston bombers. As I said, the mission of a real-time crime center, other than taking all this data in, is to create it into something we can use, actionable intelligence, to benefit officers in the field and improve crime solution. In order to achieve this goal, several software programs will be purchased. These are the leading solutions for the development of linkages between incidents. The National Insurance Crime Bureau has offered to lease the department a vehicle to be used as an auto burglary and auto theft bait vehicle. The department is responsible for outfitting the vehicle with necessary equipment to allow the vehicle to be used as a crime deterrence tool. This is not a picture of the actual car. Once deployed, this vehicle would be monitored by the dispatch center and the real-time crime center for any alerts that would come up. While attending the ILEA Crime Analysis Conference, I was introduced to Esri's suite of law enforcement applications that's already included in the city's GIS license. Nathan Slade with the city's GIS department working with me on this RTCC project and helping produce new crime analysis products that will be used for informational purposes in-house and in community meetings. This slide is a sample of a product that we've put together that would help visualize crime by time, sector, and type all on one dashboard. It'll be our goal to automate a lot of these reports and be able to pull them real time for interested parties. Each of the systems I reviewed this morning, including ShotSpotter, the city cameras, and the LPRs, have their own individual software platforms. They each display their own map. They each tell where the crime is occurring on a separate monitor. The challenge to officers trying to quickly respond to gunshots or activations off of a ShotSpotter system is that everything shows up on a different screen in front of you. LiveEarth is a real-time situational awareness platform that integrates computer-aided dispatch, ShotSpotter, LPR, city cameras, private cameras, all onto one display, providing a common operating picture that can be accessed at the real-time crime center, by tablet, laptop computers, or in our dispatch center. LiveEarth places all these systems on one pane of glass, allowing users to quickly locate data feeds that can create actionable intelligence. It can accept various data layers, including damage surveys, and visualize the data for operators. This could be helpful during hurricanes. While this system is internet dependent and runs in the cloud, therefore during a natural disaster we can't be guaranteed to have access to it. If our internet connection is working, this is a system that we could push out to other departments to share a common operating picture of where damage has occurred and update it through the GIS and push it out to everybody at the same time. The company has a provision in there for surge licensing during a declared state of emergency or during a critical incident. Therefore, we could push this out to the EOC and, as I said, other city departments. Earlier, I asked you to consider being the officer responding to the scene of a crime, with the only lead being a red car fleeing from the scene. This is an all too familiar scenario. I'd like to share with you how our response has already changed. While I've been developing this product, of course, I've been talking to my detectives and getting their input on things. I've watched as the excitement behind this technology has grown on the floor, and these are just the 40 or so detectives I'm working with on a regular basis. But I've been surprised at the way they've changed handling the calls. Instead of running out the door and 5 people running out the door to a scene of a crime, I watched last week as 2 of them immediately went to the city cameras and started searching city cameras for video of the cars. We also made a call to a couple of our neighborhood jurisdictions asking them to run these cars on their LPR networks. The response and the results have been truly phenomenal in the past couple of weeks. Using this process, we've located several suspect vehicles fleeing the city, leading investigators to the owner and eventually the vehicle. Crime scene work and interviews have helped lead to the suspect. In the past month alone, these systems, operated by adjoining jurisdictions, have aided in the identification of multiple suspect vehicles and aided in the arrest of 1 homicide suspect within 21 hours. Build out and staffing. The Real-Time Crime Center will be built inside the existing Criminal Investigations Division briefing room and initially staffed during peak hours. It is our intention to make this a 24-hour operation center. Once the contracts are signed, the construction of the Real-Time Crime Center build-out will begin. We're estimating 8 weeks for the delivery of furniture and computers, upgrade to infrastructure, and installation of a video wall. The software and analytical systems should also be delivered within this 8 weeks of the contracts being signed. Phase 2 of the build-out includes the installation of the LPR network and ShotSpotter. The LPR network is estimated to be installed within 12 weeks of the contracts being signed. ShotSpotter is estimated to be operational within 3 to 4 months after signing of contracts. Officer training on our gun violence initiative would begin this summer and be applied as the ShotSpotter is installed. A total of 13 contracts will have to be reviewed through the purchasing process for this project, and once the contracts are signed, the center will be operational within 3 to 4 months. The projected cost here represented on this slide could be a little higher or lower depending on the number of LPR installations that are approved. This represents 13 fixed locations and 2 trailers. These figures also include annual warranty and maintenance for each system. I'm going to ask that we hold questions after Mr. Daly presents, and then the two of us can address any issues that you might have.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
Thank you.
Daly?
Good afternoon, everybody. Sure. My name is Phil Daly. I am the Southeast Director for ShotSpotter. And happy belated Mother's Day to your mothers out there.
You may have to speak up so we can hear you.
Speak up? Okay. All right, thank you. Got it. Well, again, thank you very much, Madam Mayor, council members, and everybody here. Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Phil Daly. I'm the Southeast Director for ShotSpotter. I've been with the company for about 8 years. There's a little bit of background on myself. I'm a former police sergeant from Baltimore City. I served on various federal task forces targeting violent drug organizations. And so not only have I seen the impact of gun violence on a professional level, if you're familiar with Baltimore, you know we've had our share of gun violence, but I've also experienced it on a more personal level through the loss of a childhood friend who was murdered in Washington, D.C. So for me, what we do as a company in terms of making communities safer from gun violence and enabling more responsive policing is not just business for me. It's something I'm very passionate about. And I'm happy to report that it's also a passion that's really ingrained in the culture of our company. Many of us are former law enforcement, and really there's a deep passion for helping law enforcement better address gun violence. Is anybody here familiar or a fan of hockey by any chance? All right, we got a few hockey fans. I'm always a little nervous about asking that question in the South, but I know we have at least one from Western Pennsylvania here. So it recently struck me, no pun intended, as I was watching a documentary on hockey, that we can learn something about gun violence from watching hockey, especially the way it was played in the 80s and 90s. And back then in the National Hockey League, there was a small subgroup of players known as the enforcers. And these players were not the best players in the league, nor were they the fastest skaters in the league, but they did have some very unique characteristics that made them highly sought after. They were fiercely loyal. We might even say they were fiercely territorial. They were prone to violence, and they were very good at fighting. Their job was to beat up and intimidate the other team's players. That small subgroup of players was responsible for the overwhelming majority of fights in hockey. Now, what's interesting is that hockey was and is illegal in the game of hockey. So the question is, why were these players recruited, and why was this practice not only tolerated but often encouraged by league owners? And the reason, according to sociologists, psychologists, and even criminologists who studied the game of hockey, is that enforcers were needed to protect their own players because the referees did not. You see, the perception in the league at the time was that referees were allowing too many cheap shots to go unaddressed, and so it was up to the enforcers to protect their own players through fear, violence, and intimidation. Now, hockey continues to be a tough physical sport, but the fact is it's far less violent than it used to be in the 80s and 90s. And so what did the National Hockey League do to reduce the level of violence? And it's really quite simple. They increased their capacity to identify cheap shots. they began to quickly, consistently, and severely punish those infractions. And they created an environment where enforcers either had to adapt to a new, cleaner game or get out of the league altogether. So now you might be asking, well, Phil, what does this have to do with gun violence on our streets? I'm glad you asked. So let's see if we can connect the dots. Studies suggest that it's a very small subgroup of individuals, a fraction of 1%, that's responsible for over 74% of shootings in our streets. What we also know based on research and experience is that some of the traditional police strategies to reduce violence, such as gun buyback programs or throwing a wide net over the community, are not sustainable, they're costly, and they're often perceived by the community as over-aggressive policing. And so as we talk about ShotSpotter, we're really talking about using this real-time gunfire intelligence, as one chief put it, actually Chief Thompson from Camden, New Jersey. And if you're familiar with Camden, New Jersey, used to be the homicide capital of the United States. And Chief Thompson's really credited for a major turnaround in Camden. But the way he described the use of ShotSpotter, the metaphor that he used was that it's like using a spear instead of a net to shoot for these shooters. So we're going to talk about focused deterrence and getting very focused on that very small percentage of individuals who are responsible for the overwhelming majority of your shootings. But to start, let's look at what are some of the fundamental challenges that law enforcement faces in terms of dealing with gun violence. And one of the key fundamental challenges that law enforcement faces is that nationwide, on the average, less than 20% of shootings are reported through 911. This means that most law enforcement agencies are working with an 80 to 90% deficiency in their intelligence as it relates to gunfire. And you've heard the old adage, you can't manage what you can't measure. The other challenge is that when someone calls 911, they're typically calling several minutes after an event's occurred, and unless they're an eyewitness to the event, they can only provide very vague information. And we've actually done some research on this, and on the average, a 911 caller is off by about 780 feet. That means that to do an effective police response just based on a 911 call, you'd have to canvass 200 to 300 addresses. And I can tell you that as a former police sergeant in Baltimore City, if we got a call for shots fired in the 1600 block of Exeter Street, our response was going to be to drive down that street. We were going to look to the right, we were going to look to the left, and unless we saw someone standing there with a gun or a body on the ground on a busy night, a busy shift, that call was probably going to be called unfounded, and we would move on to the next call for service. And so the opportunity to identify suspects, witnesses, recover evidence, or potentially get to the scene in time to give life-rendering aid under this 911 only model become extremely slim. And unfortunately, for the people who live in these communities and who hear the sound of a gunfire day in and day out, that lack of a precise and timely police response fuels negative perceptions about law enforcement. In these communities, gunfire has tragically become normalized. And like in our hockey example, violence begets violence. And in the absence of society's referees showing up, some people will take matters into their own hands. But it carries a heavy social, psychological, and economic cost. Children is always or especially vulnerable to violence. Exposure to violence impacts crucial areas of their brains, those dealing with learning, memory, and behavior control. And some researchers who've long studied these children believe that nearly a third of children who are exposed to violence will suffer from the same levels of post-traumatic stress that plague soldiers returning from war. Now, one of my colleagues, a well-respected retired police chief, actually objects to the term post-traumatic stress because unlike soldiers who get to return home from war, these children are often placed right back in the environment where they were first traumatized. If I can personalize this just a little bit more, through my work as a police sergeant in some of Baltimore's most vulnerable neighborhoods and ongoing conversations I've had with people who live in communities that are impacted by gun violence, I've gotten a little bit of a glimpse of what it's like to live in these communities. And oftentimes, people who live there have protocols they follow when gunfire erupts. That protocol typically consists of scrambling to get your kids to a safer place in the house or scrambling to get them to lay flat on the ground. Now I want you to imagine for a moment that you're a parent raising children in that environment, and on a weekly, if not daily basis, you hear the sound of gunfire erupt outside your home. You follow your protocol, you scramble to get your kids to a safer place in the house, and when the gunfire subsides, and you finally go peek out the window, rarely if ever do you see a police response. Now let me ask you this. What do you think is the perception that would begin to form in your mind about law enforcement? And this is the part where it gets interactive. What's the perception?
They're doing their job.
They don't care. It's not true, but that's the perception that's formed. So what is ShotSpotter? How does it work? And how does it help address these problems? If we had to describe in 3 short words what we do, they would be detect, protect, and connect. We detect and locate gunfire to enable a fast and precise response to every gunfire incident, or over 90% of gunfire incidents that occur within the targeted area. That fast, consistent, and precise response has a strong deterrent impact, and it disrupts the gun violence cycle. We protect officers by providing them with increased awareness of the real ground truth of the amount of gunfire that's actually occurring in the areas they patrol day in and day out. And we provide them critical situational awareness when they're responding to a specific incident. And last but not least, we help law enforcement connect with the communities they serve. Now I want to pause here for just a moment and give you an example of what this may look like. In South Bend, Indiana, the South Bend Police Department initiated the following protocol around a ShotSpotter alert. When a ShotSpotter alert goes off, it's an immediate priority 1 call for service. They're responding to it as if it was an active shooter incident. So they immediately go to the location, they get out of the vehicle, they secure the scene, and the next thing they do is critical. They go knock on the doors immediately around the alert location, and when people answer the door, they have a conversation that goes something like this. Good evening. Our system detected a shooting incident near your home. Are you okay? Is anyone hurt? That kind of police response has had a dramatic impact on changing the perception of the community towards law enforcement from one of a military occupying force, if you will, to one of guardians who are truly there to serve and protect them. That type of response, done consistently over time, has a transformative impact on communities that historically have suffered from gun violence and have grown distrustful of law enforcement and local government. So how does this system work? We build out a sensor array, a dome of protection, if you will, with approximately 20 to 25 sensors per square mile. Those sensors sit there passively until they hear an explosive event, a boom, bang, or pop. In the case of a gunfire event, that sound propagates out, hits at least 3 of our sensors. The system then goes from passive mode to active mode to determine the exact location of where that event occurred. That information is then sent to the cloud, where it goes through a 2-tier classification process. Tier 1, again, is this highly sophisticated software that calculates the exact location where the event occurred. It filters out anything that's obviously not gunfire. And then within 4 to 6 seconds, that information is then received at our National Incident Review Center, which is staffed by highly trained acoustic experts. They do a 2nd-tier analysis. They'll confirm whether or not this is indeed a gunfire event. And they're also listening to additional contextual details so that within 30 to 60 seconds of the trigger time, law enforcement agencies now receive from us a web-based notification, a dot on the map indicating the exact location and where the event occurred. So it's not just an address parcel, but a dot on that address parcel where the gunfire event occurred, how many shots were fired, and if we believe there's multiple shooters involved, we'll provide that information as well. Those alerts can be received in a dispatch center, real-time crime center, right on computers in police vehicles, and now can be received on smartphones and tablets as well. Furthermore, ShotSpotter can be integrated with other technologies, including video management systems, common operating pictures. Some agencies are even now using it or testing it out with drone technology as well. In addition to the very real deterrent and trust-building impact of simply using ShotSpotter for a faster and consistent response to deter and disrupt gun violence, there's also some major investigative and intelligence-led policing benefits to the use of ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter data has provided critical information for investigations, prosecutions, and it also provides a treasure trove of intelligence that can be used by agencies to move them from a reactive position to a proactive position. One of the things that many of our agencies are also doing is using ShotSpotter to get police to the dot of where every gunfire event occurs and collecting far more evidence. That evidence, those casings, can be fed into a database to connect shooters and shooting events, and again, drive the quick identification of who these, what we call serial triggers, are in a community. Over the last year and a half, the Chicago Police Department has been using ShotSpotter in their Strategic Decision Support Centers, essentially a real-time crime center, and they've made major strides on reducing gun violence. And I just want to read you this quote here in terms of what the police superintendent said about the role of ShotSpotter as part of that overall strategy. Now, this is his words. "The one technology that has made the most difference in Chicago's reduction in gun violence in the last 12 months has been ShotSpotter. It's a game changer," said Eddie Johnson, superintendent of the Chicago Police Department. "We are pleased with the progress made in the last year, but we plan to achieve even more with our residents to feel safe and know we are ready to respond faster and predict where the next incident may occur." Just a quick little side note story that I thought was very powerful about the impact of ShotSpotter in Chicago. Historically, so ShotSpotter was initially placed in some of the two of the worst districts, 7 and 11 in Chicago. And historically, the police department in those districts has done a community outreach on Halloween night to reach out to kids. And historically, very few people have shown up for that event. Last year, there were hundreds of families and children who showed up because they had seen the impact that ShotSpotter had in reducing gun violence in their community and the opportunity for those local law enforcement officers to be able to start building connections, meaningful conversations with the community. In terms of the coverage area here in West Palm Beach, this heat map represents a density of 1,345 gunfire-related incidents, including 37 murders between January 1st, 2015 and June 14th, 2017. This is a 4.6 square mile coverage area. That's the one outlined in blue. It represents 752 gunfire-related incidents, or about 55.9% of the total, including 25 murders, or 67, almost 68% of your total homicides. In addition, you have a number of schools that are included within the coverage area. I think it counts 7 schools there that are included within the coverage area as well. And I just place those because in today's environment, we never know when an active shooter incident is going to occur on a campus, and ShotSpotter on a number of occasions has been used to enable a much faster response to those schools and to trigger lockdowns of the schools to protect students as well. So in closing, I want to leave you with the following summarizing thought. Right now, 8 to 9 out of 10 times that someone fires a gun in your most vulnerable neighborhoods, the police never show up simply because they don't know about it. And as a result, people who live in these communities are fearful, they're frustrated, and they often feel disconnected from the rest of society. And I think ShotSpotter is a tool that can enable you to change that narrative. And so we're excited to be here. We're passionate about this mission of enabling faster, more responsive policing and enabling safer communities, and I hope you'll allow us to join you in that effort. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Mr. Daly. I appreciate you coming here and giving us this presentation.
Sure.
I wonder if Lieutenant, you could join him. Okay, what questions do we have? Mr. James.
Thank you, and thank both of you for the presentation on that we are proactively seeking out technology that will help us in the war against crime. One question I had, and ironically you brought up Chicago, because I've written down a question as for ShotSpotters. Where else has it been used, and has success been proven with actual data? And you brought up Chicago. From what I hear, and I'm on the outside looking at it, it seems like gun violence is increasing in Chicago, and certainly the number of deaths. So can you kind of elaborate on how long ShotSpotter's been used there?
Sure.
What the experience has been? Because it seems to be a disconnect in my mind.
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much.
So Chicago gets a lot of attention on its gun violence problem. Historically, ShotSpotter had about 3 square miles of ShotSpotter coverage that they never used. It's been there for years. They never used it. About a year and a half ago, the new superintendent went to New York City to take a look at what they were doing in terms of using ShotSpotter to reduce gun violence in New York City. He knew they'd been successful there, wanted to find out how Chicago could use it. He came back from those meetings, met with the mayor, and said, I now have a much better sense in terms of what a working model around the use of ShotSpotter could look like. And they did a 9 square mile initial coverage area in Districts 7 and 11. Within the first 3 months, they'd seen a over 60% reduction in shooting incidents within that coverage area, and it began to quickly expand. So they went for, initially started with that 9 square miles. They're now over 100 square miles based on those results and outcomes. Their overall gun violence I think it's either 7 or 11, is down about 60%. In the other district, it's down about 40%. And across all the ShotSpotter coverage areas, it's down about 20%. And some of those, we're quickly expanding that up to that 100 square miles, so it's quickly growing. You've got agencies here in Florida who've seen significant reductions in gun violence and shooting incidents as well. In the city of Miami, which has had our system for about 3.5, 4 years, they saw a 55% reduction in shooting incidents within the coverage area, and that correlated to about a 40% reduction in homicides within that coverage area. The city of Riviera Beach, next door to you, over the last year saw a 35% reduction in shooting incidents, and they've seen reductions in homicides and shootings with injuries as well. So yeah, we've got a lot of data pointing to the success of ShotSpotter. But I do want to just kind of put one little side note. ShotSpotter is a tool that provides critical situational awareness in terms of gunfire data. Gunfire data would otherwise be unobtainable. The results are driven by how well an agency operationalizes around the use of that ShotSpotter. And so that's why I'm actually very pleased in terms of seeing the plan, the overall plan that West Palm Beach Police Department is putting around this. There's no doubt in my mind that they'll successfully implement this system.
And I think that augments the possibility or the chances of success when we have the whole system together. ShotSpotter is a piece of it,
Yep.
but the whole real-time crime center
Absolutely.
and everything else that happens is going to give us a better opportunity to be successful.
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Other questions? Patricia?
Thank you. I'm so excited about this. Part of what is so important about this is the current situation that I find in our North End neighborhoods is that Facebook serves as our ShotSpotter. It's is it fireworks or is it gunshots? And I think this is a key tool in that, as well as looking at license plate readers, which has been a key component in some neighborhoods. And I think most importantly, which is a detail I don't want to get lost, is having personal security systems registered voluntarily with the police department, I think is really complementary. So my question is with live birth, because I think to me that's the most integral part of this, is how do we get all these systems to work together?
Yeah. I actually had a demo which I couldn't pull up here of LiveEarth, but that is a technology that was developed for the Department of Defense. And when you're working with Department of Defense contracts, the contractor who's developing this stuff isn't allowed to release it to the public for a number of years. This system just got released to the public. When I was investigating these different systems, I went down to Miami Gardens, and you walk into a very large real-time crime center, 6 different monitors up on the walls. And the one thing the sergeant said to me was, if I knew about LiveEarth when I put this whole thing together, I'd need one of these monitors because everything goes on the same screen. ShotSpotter detection goes off. The person watching that screen sees where the ShotSpotter is. Here are my city cameras surrounding it. We can start looking at those. Here are my LPRs surrounding that. We can start looking at those. Here are all the privately registered video cameras. We can send an email out to these people saying, hey, could you please check your systems for this? And my boots on the ground officers can immediately know where that shot is within about, what, 20 meters? 20, 25 meters?
Yeah, and if you talk to most of our customers, usually within 5 to 10 feet. So our guarantee is within 25 meters, but it's oftentimes much closer than that.
It's impressive. And Commissioner, to address your concern, I went to a lot of these cities. Our neighbors to the north can't stop talking about the successes they've had with ShotSpotter. They went from 1 square mile to 3 or 4 square miles. They saw an initial bump because they covered that initial bigger area, and then it dropped back down to a smaller number than they were having in that 1 square mile area. It's an amazing solution to this. And being able to bring in live earth and put it all on one screen. And then the other benefit of this is, as I said, it's internet dependent. We're pushing a lot of stuff up to the cloud. But if our internet connections are working, we can share this information during critical incidents with the EOC, with a lot of people, and get a lot of real-time information out to the people who need it in their hands immediately. And that's the real beauty of that live earth system.
With the live earth system, citizens can register their cameras. Will there be a communication that's available back? So if there's an incident, that there is a communication back to those residents as well as a two-way tool?
Live earth doesn't. We register the cameras in our city's GIS actually, because we're going to push that information out to the officers as much as possible. We are going to be working to notify people. Hey, there's an incident in your neighborhood. Can you please review your privately held video for us? We're not asking for access to that video. We're just saying, can you please review this? If you find something of evidentiary value, notify us. I've been on scenes where I've gone door to door looking for these videos, and we found valuable information on videos, and then I've knocked on doors where the person isn't home because they work a night shift or they work a day shift, and we never get it, and we don't know what we've lost there.
Thank you. Commissioner Langford, did you have a question?
I did, thank you. So you talked about, did you mention 100 square miles in Chicago that it is ShotSpotter?
Yeah, we're now contracted for 100 square miles.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about how we picked our 4 miles and how, I'm sure that we cover other areas with the license plate readers and how it all generates?
Let me see if I can share something with you.
While you're doing that, Commissioner, you had a question?
Yeah, actually, it probably was for Lieutenant Hagan as well.
And did you have a question for Mr. Bailey?
Sure. Because I thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
The Northwest neighborhood is in my district, so this is the kind of technology that we have been working towards putting in that hotspot neighborhood, which is probably why this area hopefully is in the first go-round. But what I find interesting is the questions about the reduction of violence. This is really a tool that allows you to arrest or track the offenders. Mm-hmm. And so this is not a tool to prevent it. You know, so somebody's going to shoot, they're going to shoot, and until you're there and able to track it. So I think, as you mentioned, and I think the nexus needs to be really spelled out for everyone to understand. It's that center in terms of getting that information and making those arrests and then getting the information into the community that this is what's happening, and therefore this doesn't become something that continues. So question is do you see it reducing totally or moving elsewhere?
Thank you. Great question. So we actually see very little displacement as it relates to gun violence. Typically, people shoot guns where they think they can get away, where they're going to be able to get into a house and hide out as soon as the events occurred. So we actually see very little displacement. I will say this. I think that the greatest value in ShotSpotter is actually deterrence and disrupting the gun violence cycle. Imagine you're living in one of these neighborhoods, and day in and day out there's violence around you, and 8 to 9 out of 10 times the police has never shown up. I can't blame somebody for wanting to carry a gun on themselves. In a minute, more and more people are carrying guns on themselves in these neighborhoods where it's a very volatile environment, the higher the likelihood that gun violence is going to erupt. So the fact that law enforcement now has the opportunity to consistently show up has a really powerful deterrent impact and disrupts that whole gun violence cycle. And again, remember, it's a very small number of individuals who are responsible for the vast majority of shootings. So if we can get focused on those few individuals, what we typically see with even few arrests, we see big drops in overall gun violence in these communities.
Thank you. Lieutenant, go ahead.
To address the question about the positioning of ShotSpotter, this was a slide I'd done together for the command staff when we started discussing this project. This slide represents 1,300 shots fired incidents that were called into a 911 center, to our 911 center. This graphic can only display 500 of them. Okay? It would be black, essentially, with little dots and numbers on it. 1,300 is the 20% that Mr. Daly was talking about. Okay? That is an area where 72% of the shots fired incidents have occurred. And actually, that's based on an old proposal where we were looking at 4 square miles instead of the 4.6 square miles we were discussing now.
How far south would you go? Can you tell them where?
I'm sorry, ma'am?
How far south?
The proposal, it goes south to just beneath that warehouse district, the new warehouse district over here. It goes just beneath that. I can tell you for shots fired incidents, it's not happening in the south end of the city. Okay? 93%, 94% of the shots fired calls happen north of Okeechobee Boulevard. Okay. And then the only other thing is this last slide here. In that same ShotSpotter area, when we did that, 38 murders and 2 attempted murders that had occurred, 74% of our homicides had occurred within that ShotSpotter area.
Commissioner Yearning, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead.
So a couple of years ago, we met regarding this technology. I'm glad to see that it's could possibly be a part of a more comprehensive approach. And that's really what I'm taking away from today's update, specifically the real-time crime center.
Yes, sir.
So the strategies that go into that are fluid enough that they can come and go as technology presents itself, as I'm sure we'll have benchmarks, and if a strategy isn't meeting that benchmark, you move away from it.
It's very interesting when you ask about the real-time crime centers. Right now, this is a relatively new concept for the, if you talk about NYPD, they installed this concept back after 9/11. You talk about City of Philadelphia, they installed these concepts years ago. Bringing it to the local level where we're 100,000 populations, relatively new. Miami Gardens just installed a beautiful center down there. But all these companies that do this and provide this technology do it as a subscription service. It's software as a subscription. We say, okay, we got a 3-year subscription with them. If it's not working out, then we've got another product we can look at 3 years down the road or 2 years down the road if their technology is not keeping pace with what we need it to keep pace with. All right, we can change it up. What we've presented today is the benchmark. It is the top of the line equipment to solve this problem, and I've seen it work. I've been amazed. We have several open cases that I can't get into specifically, but I can tell you I have found homicide cars within minutes, and we made 1 arrest within 21 hours. All right, and you're not going to get that result without the aid here.
Take one last question, Commissioner James, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a comment and a question. The comment is, and it does not go unnoticed to me, how this ShotSpotter program works seamlessly with, I know, the chief's efforts in community policing. And I like that hand-in-glove approach, that as this becomes more effective, it restores confidence in those communities in our police department. The question I have, and this is probably more for Mr. Green and you, Mayor, is I know that we are undergoing an extensive IT upgrade, and so is all of this new software, are they talking to our IT director, and is that all going to work together seamlessly?
Yes, that is actually, Christine has been involved in that process and has been in these discussions.
And while you're talking, tell us how we're going to find the money.
So, as you recall, when you sold the old City Hall site, you're going to bring as part of that resolution recognizing those funds, a request for you to fund the, I think it's $1 million for the initial phase of the project. That's going to come on the 21st.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. This is really informative, and I appreciate the time and place to help us out here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, item number 2, Mr. Green.
I'm going to disconnect all together. Bureau, and you need to be into this one, I think.
I played hockey at the University of Pennsylvania, and I will admit I was an enforcer.
Why am I asked?
Actually, couldn't get away with that in college, but I
Don't
know.
worry about the mic, it's not working.
No, it's the.
No, but you keep touching the mic.
Yeah, but for some reason this is not. Any reason why the?
Well, actually, try the bottom one. Try the little thing on the bottom. and see if that works.
Here we go. All right, thank you, Mayor. Again, Rick Green, Development Services Director. And what we'd like to do is kind of give you an overview of what we're calling the Jefferson Terminal District, and we'll talk a little bit about why we're calling it that. So this is really going to be a group presentation. I've got 4 of my staff members here: Angela Van, our Planning and Zoning Administrator, Desiree Estabrook, our Historic Preservation Planner, Caroline Glass, our GIS Planner, and Heather Trebrew, our Senior Comprehensive Planner. So we've been working, and there's been a lot of activity in this area. So a while back, I asked the mayor if we could do some proactive study and analysis of this area, and she said that we could. So we've been working on this presentation now for a few weeks, so we appreciate the opportunity to bring it back. So we'll talk about some existing conditions in this area. We'll talk about national and local trends, talk about some economic analysis of this area, and then we're going to seek policy direction from this group. So with the policy direction, we'll mention this up front, and then we'll put the slide back up at the end. But the questions that we're going to be asking is, should the city be allowing residential development in the Jefferson Terminal District? And what prompted this discussion was the fact that we have a lot happening with the warehouse district. We recently received an application for a new residential project, so we'll talk about that in more detail. Secondly, should the city be concerned about losing industrial zone property? What types of zoning changes, if any, does the city propose for this district? Should the city focus on improvements to the capital infrastructure? And then we'll talk about the future of the city-owned property. So all these questions, please keep in mind as we go through the presentation. And of course, we've got recommendations on all of those questions. So beginning with an overview, the location of the district is reflected in the yellow color, again, immediately southwest of the downtown area, just south of Okeechobee. As you zoom in, you'll see the boundaries are really Okeechobee Boulevard to the north, Parker Avenue and the Stub Canal to the east, Interstate 95 to the west, and to the south, Australian Avenue to the west. So the property is physically constrained by these roadways. Just for comparison, the red outline represents the size of the Palm Beach outlets. So you can see that it's a little larger than 2. You could almost fit 3 Palm Beach outlet size, just to give you kind of configuration, an idea of what the 183 acres look like. The site certainly is convenient to many areas: the Tri-Rail Station, City Hall downtown, the airport, Palm Beach Atlantic University. All of these locations are within a 30-minute walk, a 10-minute bike ride, and 8 minutes by car. So it is centrally located. It has many of the advantages of the downtown. It's also an area in transition, and what got us interested in looking at this in more detail. When you look at some of the sales of properties downtown, you see in white some of the recent sales ranging, and these are just a few examples, from $63 a square foot for the Banyan site Mr. Green owns to $176 a square foot. And you compare that with some of the recent transactions within this district reflected in the green that range in the $7 to $27 a square foot. So land price is considerably less, but again, nonetheless, it's becoming a very attractive area for investors. Again, you have close proximity to downtown and the airport, a lot of reinvestment beginning to happen right now, And one of the things we're starting to see is the inclusion and desire to have residential within this area as well. So some of the recent projects, certainly indoor soccer has been there now for a few years. You've got the public storage building that was just opened recently, 100,000 square feet just east of Australian. You've got the warehouse district that's been doing a lot of exciting things. The residential project that we just received that's going through the process now that you will eventually see at 1701 Clare Avenue. And then Chris Rug is working with a gentleman who's interested in opening a wine bottling facility. So these are just some of the things that we're starting to see happening within the district. And again, we've been looking at this for some time. We actually worked in 2017 with Florida Atlantic University at their Fort Lauderdale branch. Myself and Chris and others participated in an incubator system and process where we met with other folks in the development industry to talk about transition areas like this. So again, it's been in discussion now for a few years. So at this point, let me turn it over to Desiree. She'll talk very quickly. We've got 4 slides to talk about how this area has historically functioned and why we're calling it the Jefferson Terminal District.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just give a quick overview. This area started to develop in the spring of 1926 with the WAG Corporation. Essentially, is to utilize undeveloped land south of the city, primarily for expanding industrial and commercial uses. You can see clearly off to the west, the old WPB Boulevard going down to the south. But essentially, is a way to use the existing rail spurs and stub canal, which is bringing produce and agricultural products from Novichody to the city. And so we can see the early advertisements about cold storage, we had lumber facilities, an early bakery. Read next slide. A lot of other kind of light industrial commercial uses coming into this area. And so in the office, we examined the 1950s Same Board Fire Insurance maps to understand the typology of buildings and uses in the area. And surprisingly, there's a good mix of single-family, multifamily, commercial, and still some vacant. And primarily with Caroline Street North, we had more of the residential. As the parcel sizes increased to the south, we had more of the larger industrial uses, processing and whatnot. And you can see just on the lower left, some of the examples of the businesses and typologies we had that existed then in the 50s. And so essentially, you can see there was a wide variety of housing types. What we found out is through the mid-century, we started zoning and segregated uses. So we started losing the existing residential and kind of what was considered workforce housing in the area as it became primarily industrial.
Okay. And then with existing conditions, let me introduce Caroline Glass. Caroline's been doing some wonderful things for us on our mapping, the citywide project maps that you see on our webpage right now. If you haven't experienced that, Caroline did a very nice graph, but we'll ask her to talk about some of the maps she prepared to show existing conditions.
Good morning, everyone. So in order to better understand the area, we went to a thorough data analysis. So seen here is our zoning map that we looked at first. If you look in gray, the eastern side, about 70% of this area is industrial. In red, we have a cluster of commercial zoning that we're explaining out, as well as a cluster of multifamily residential zoning shown in brown. So here, we wanted to take it a step further by actually going to the area, field verifying, using business tax licenses to look at what's actually there. So this is a map of our existing uses. We found quite a mixture of uses. So in those areas that were zoned commercial and industrial, it was actually an industrial commercial mix. So you'll see those gray industrial uses blending with the red, more commercial type uses on the map above. So there are many different types. You'll see in yellow on the map some of the things that are there. Currently, surf shop, glass etching, hot sauce. So we have a big diversity of uses. In the bottom corner, we have residential zoning, which is zoned multifamily. But in actuality, we found that only about a third of that was multifamily, and that there was single-family and vacant lots in the area as well. So finally, we looked at property ownership. So in this study area, we found that properties were generally small, and that 8 property owners had more than 2 acres. So starting at the top, we have Florida Power and Light and Town of Palm Beach. And then below that, we have the City of West Palm Beach, which is our largest property owner in the area with about 25 acres of property. And then there's a few other smaller ones, Triangle Club, Murphy Construction, which is the 1701 Clare project, storage, hardware, and towing, all totaling about 50
Heather, we'll ask you to talk about national and local trends. But
So what we did is we looked at national trends for districts that were similar to this. And the first one we looked at was in Tampa, Florida. About a year ago, they worked with local businesses and local residents to develop a partnership to do a vision action plan for the area, and that plan should be coming out within the next year. We also looked at St. Louis, Missouri. They have a technology district that has produced over 4,200 jobs. This is roughly 200 acres, and we're looking at 184 acres in comparison. So one of their best practices is something from their lessons learned. They didn't put any excuses in there. So that's something that we really think is important. So the third thing, we're gonna go out west. Rick and the staff has actually had a chance to go to Denver, Colorado, and meet with the planning director and staff, and they recently adopted an overlay district to allow residential in their industrial. And as part of that, they included a workforce housing incentive, which is very interesting. And then going to Vancouver, a little bit out of the country, but they actually opened up their industrial area in the 1970s. So you have your sleek urban center in Vancouver where they have lots of residential development, 40 to 60 stories tall, but then you have your funky, cool warehouse district that now is an entertainment and tourism destination. So with that, we have what's happening here at the Jefferson Terminal District. Have you all been down there? Yes. Okay, good. So we have our market, we have our yoga, we have Elizabeth Avenue Station retail, and this is really kind of the beginning of where we're going to guide our road.
So looking at some of the economic numbers of the area, again, looking at some of the trends, building permits, you see that they've almost tripled in the 5 years. All the areas reflected in the blue color represent where building permits have been pulled recently. Similarly, our business tax licenses have grown from 17 to 90 over a 4-year period. So again, a significant amount of activity happening there. A lot of turnover with property. All the properties reflected in the red color have been sold. Recently, over a third of all the parcels within the last 5 years. Those in the dark red have taken place within the last 2 years. So again, a tremendous amount of investment in this corridor has happened. One of the things I like to do, and we did this years ago in the downtown, is we do an analysis based on building value to land value. So where that building value ratio is high, that means that the building that sits on the property is worth a lot more than the land it sits on. When it's inverted and it's a lower number, that means the land value is higher than the building value, and those are typically parcels that are ripe for development. So using the example, Lofton Place, the residential project just a little bit north of us, has that building value to land value in excess of 7. The New Hilton Hotel's at 5, the Palm Beach Outlet's at 4, Phillips Point at 3, again signifying that the building is far more valuable than the land it sits on. And then conversely, you look at the other extreme, the nurse's residence at 300 Palm Beach Lakes is less than 1, implying a high land value. Rich's Ice Cream under 1. And in the northwest corner, 45th Street and Military is a gas station there now, again, a low value. So within this district, you see the values associated by color. And again, you see on average, we're at a ratio of about 0.38, implying that, again, it's a tremendous amount of value based on the land in comparison to the building it sits on. And then when you look at appreciation over the past year, another map that Caroline presented, you see there's been a 35% appreciation in value. The bluer colors are the highest, going down to the darker, but you see, again, a tremendous amount of appreciation in just the past year. And again, that's attributed to all the investment that's taken place. When you compare this district, which is primarily estimated to be an industrial district, you see that 35% appreciation, and you start comparing that to other districts within the city, particularly industrial districts. On average, the citywide growth over that period of time has been about 10%. The Florida Mango Industrial District just west of here experienced a 9% growth rate. Georgia Avenue, 8% appreciation. 45th Street, just under 8%. Electronics Way, 7.7, and Northwood, 6.3. So all of that under the city average of about 10, but Jefferson Terminal District, again, almost a threefold increase of investment within that 1 year period. So again, going back to policy direction, Again, a lot of the things that we are suggesting we'd like to try to do in this district would be consistent with our strategic plan. Again, leveraging land use planning, trying to create affordable and workforce housing, creating placemaking strategies, improving the infrastructure, job creation, et cetera. So I think we're fairly consistent. So today you have existing single-family and multifamily. You have new industrial and existing industrial that's there. You've got new mixed-use projects that are coming in with the warehouse district and the Clare Avenue project in new residential. So all of that kind of overlays the Jefferson terminal. So you're seeing overlap between all these different areas. And it's a challenge because, again, industrial allows some of these uses, but not all of them. So going back to the 5 questions we posed at the outset of our presentation, we'd like to talk about each one. I'll turn it over to Angela for these first few. Yes.
I know we were talking about this area, an innovation district. Is that still on the table, or are we still?
It depends how you define an innovation district. We were just a few of us were at the National Planning Conference in New Orleans, and I actually attended a couple sessions on innovation districts, and those are usually in big cities where you have something like the Cleveland Clinic, some of the larger cities that they talked about that employ 30 to 35,000. Chris Rug and I were discussing that last week, and you could almost assume that our entire downtown with this area would be an innovation district. This area is, I think, a little too small. Now, some of the elements of an innovation district, certainly I think we can use here, and that's something we can pursue.
Thank you. I want to ask about this piece before you move on, because there's your first question related to land use and zoning and planning. And if you go back to that slide, it talked about the creation of
Which one?
a place, sense of.
Oh, yeah.
So what's happening in this area is organic. As you said, that this is something that businesses had found a low investment ratio, an opportunity to bring an idea without problems of fitting into an existing structure. And so what I want to understand about the land use and planning and compatibility, do you intend to look at developing a brand for that area, or letting that area develop its brand based upon who's there, what they're trying to do, and how we can support that growth?
I think it's going to be the latter, but I think that's the third slide we're going to get into in just a second. But
Okay, let's go.
yeah.
The next slide, basically, we're going to go through the policy questions that we asked to get direction from the commission. First one, should the city allow residential in Jefferson Terminal? As Rick talked about, we have a project at 1701 Clare that's been submitted to us, approximately 173 rental units. As you can see the picture on the screen above, they're proposing rental and affordable housing with a small mixture of commercial in there. And one of the things with this property is, as you can see on the map, is actually just to the south of it is actually the residential area. So it's actually on the southern end, so it actually abuts residential. So it's not necessarily spot zone, it's not in the middle. So that's one of the things that we think residential, as Trevor talked about, would be good for this district to help promote the district.
I think that's probably the easiest question that you're asking. I mean, I think we're talking mixed use, we want to develop residential.
Right.
People agree?
So the question is, are you looking at allowing residential in the industrial zoning classification, and therefore wherever somebody comes in, as opposed to just a spot?
Commissioner, you're one step ahead of us. We're going to get to that next. But that's the option. You can either change the zoning, or you could do an overlay. We're going to talk about that right after this slide.
The next one is basically talk about the concern for losing industrial zone property. The county did a study years ago about industrial property, zone property in the Palm Beach County. But one thing we looked at, this district, is important to note that it's already a commercial mixed-use district. We look at Georgia Avenue, we look at Northwood, you look at 45th Street, those are strictly commercial/industrial. This district actually has restaurants that were there before the warehouse district went in. It has actually single family that's embedded left over from the original plat that's still located there. So it's naturally today, it's more of a mixed-use type district, so we don't feel that we are losing industrial uses there. And with the next slide, the next question, Commissioner Ryan, we're proposing to do one or two options. You can do nothing and let it naturally go, create an overlay district, overlay for the district, or change the land use and zoning. One of the things I think the city staff would like to do an overlay district. With an overlay district, again, it would still allow the industrial use there continue to operate, continue to go, not create non-conforming uses or anything like that. But it will allow for us to write regulations for residential if they want to come in. Allow for us to do some type of requirements for or regulations and design guidelines, and help basically design what you want to see for any future things that will come in. But again, not basically prohibiting or limiting or penalizing existing industrial uses that are there.
And simply rezoning the industrial to commercial, again, would create some nonconformities and would also not allow some uses that are there today. So we'd like to avoid that. We are, yes. I'm sorry.
Create an overlay district, and so basically what you're...
Again, Florida Power and Light owns property there, which I don't think that's going to ever change. Town of Palm Beach probably won't move their property. But again, our property is a pretty significant parcel. The western 5 acres that we purchased of that 25-acre total, we bought in May of 2000 for $32,000. Our entire property right now is appraised for $2.1 million. So the value has gone up considerably. I suspect as we continue to get redevelopment, as we implement an overlay district, I think it's only going to get more expensive. So just something to keep in the back of your heads that, you know, again, this might be a good opportunity for the city to be a little creative.
If I could interrupt, we have talked about Florida Power and Light pulling part of their operations out of there. So.
Okay, let's see if that
That's
happens.
good news.
Yep. And again, as I mentioned, we have an economic development study underway. So they are going to be looking at this area as well. They're going to be looking at businesses, jobs. They'll have a lot of demographic information. July, that study will be complete and presented to you. So with that, we just wanted to kind of give you an overview, make sure we were moving in the right direction. You like the concept of the overlay. And then if so, we'll follow up with the 5 policy questions we posed to you.
Good job. A lot of really interesting information. I'm excited that you're doing this. Commissioner Show?
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions. I think in general, it's a great opportunity, especially to encourage entrepreneurial activity, because it's kind of organically come up in there in that way. So I think concentrating on keeping things affordable is important. The other thing that I think is really important to address is in the overlay district. You know, typically we have industrial and we have residential, because industrial has a lot of hammering and a lot of AC noise, truck deliveries, etc. And as we start to draw more people in that didn't organically come into this neighborhood on their own, knowing that this is what it was, that we address those types of concerns so that we don't end up in a situation where someone's getting into a residential situation that they weren't expecting.
Right.
Like people who buy a condo over the Meyer Amphitheater complain about the noise. Commissioner Ryan?
Thank you. I think it's a great idea, and the increase in value is just amazing. But one of the things that I think of as we talk about what's needed in the infrastructure, and then we just had presented the mobility plan, and how, you know, that idea is, the mobility plan is to help us identify funds that will enable us to create these connections. Is it possible to move forward with a kind of a pilot program in which that, you know, the mobility plan comes into existence in a Jefferson overlay district, which would allow us to test some of these funding, charging, you know, prioritizing of the capital improvements for that?
We can look at that. I don't know how it would fit.
Would help with the funding.
We'll see.
And will
Right.
we ultimately consider running a trolley over there too?
Absolutely.
I think that certainly could be
I think there are
viable.
a lot of things that we need to think about, and especially, yes.
Yeah, if I could state, you know, we're already looking at adding parking to the existing roadways over there with minimal cost by just restriping and providing parking, and also also, that's one of the areas for the trolley.
And we really want to make it so people can walk there or take the trolley down. We don't want people, Chris, come on up.
And just also one other moment is that because the city is the largest landowner.
Because of what?
Because the city is the largest landowner, I also want to think about what type of other targeted industries we could capture that are in and around us, namely like aerospace, bioscience. I mean, we have a great asset back in there, and just with its proximity to all of those economic assets like the highway, the train stations, the airport, frankly, having the lakes next to us, I'm finding is a big asset. It just, the land just has incredible potential that I think we need to think about long term.
Thanks, Chris.
Sure.
Okay, anything else?
Nope.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. All right, I have no other matters. Anything else?
Well, I know that today's an important day for our quiet zones, and very
11:59 tonight.
very excited about that and appreciate everyone.
I thought it was 11:59 a.m., but it's
midnight. I know a lot of work has gone into getting that, making sure that it happened. Just been hearing a lot from the residents and concerned about the 13 crossings that we haven't brought up to the same level of safety that we have on these areas. And so just want to make sure, are there future plans for that?
Yes, in fact, we have immediately, and it's been completed, made improvements to where we've installed delineators that call attention to those crossings, as well as prevent vehicles from moving around the gates, trying to bypass the gates. So that's the first step. Number two is we're working with the TPA. We feel it's more powerful to work regionally to try to get additional funding. So we're looking at a 2-year process to look for improvements, grant money through the federal agencies to make improvements to those crossings, as well as enhance other safety measures within the corridor. So, we're going to keep going. We're not stopping to make this just as safe as possible. It certainly meets all, I want to make it clear, it meets all federal requirements now. Otherwise, they wouldn't have allowed it. So it is safe based on the federal requirements. But, we want to go take it a step higher than that.
And we had a press conference this morning, and Rick Rose was there, and Ellie Sewell, and everybody was very positive and supportive.
Well, and if I could, I want to make sure that we understand that while we're doing everything we can to make it safe, that if there are any accidents that are, on any of those, that we are at risk, right, of losing quiet zones? If we're not.
No, we won't lose them. I mean, we've declared a quiet zone, but people need to be smart about this. And the train, if there's something on the track, they can use their horn. So if they see any emergency or danger, the train driver, the engineer, can use the horn. So Scott, did you want to add?
Yeah.
So on that, are you going to also look at the TPA funding to extend the quiet zones from 15th Street north?
When the bright line goes north?
We're not going to do it until then?
Yeah, there's funding available to go 15th to the northern boundary. See, one of the things, the reason that this
But that's dependent on Brightline.
It's Brightline expanding to Orlando.
So
yeah. And the reason why is the bulk of the cost for the improvements is associated with the upgrades that Brightline has to make to install their rail service on there. So the bulk of the cost, so we're just piggybacking using still federal dollars through the TPA to upgrade it to reach a quiet zone status. So, we're proceeding ahead with that. As soon as Brightline does their work north, then we'll be able to establish.
Well, that was the beauty of it, because under the contracts with the municipalities, technically, the cities are responsible. So the deal that we struck as the MPO, then the MPO, now TPA, is that as Brightline was making those improvements, as you said, we would piggyback on it, which made it obviously less expensive, and also the TPA, the MPO threw in some money. So it took that burden off of, the fiscal burden off of the cities. So we'll use that same approach with the Northwood expansion.
And the next phase is because they would go through the TPA. In fact, you know, we've signaled to the TPA that we're interested in additional funding, and that we hope that regionally that other municipal governments will join with us to try to get additional funding for the corridor to as I mentioned, to even take it a level higher.
Okay, we're adjourned.